The air inside the Taco Bell was thick with the familiar, greasy sweet scent of seasoned beef and fried tortilla shells, all underscored by the faint, chemical tang of the all-purpose cleaner used to wipe down the tables. It was a smell that usually brought a sense of comfort, of cheap and easy satisfaction. But for the young woman standing near the counter, it was the smell of anxiety. A single, flickering fluorescent light overhead hummed a discordant, buzzing tune, casting long shadows that made the brightly colored menu on the wall seem to mock her. Her son, a small boy with a shock of unruly hair that fell across his forehead, was vibrating with a pure, unadulterated joy that felt a world away from her own churning stomach. His small finger, still a little chubby with childhood, left a faint smudge on the plexiglass menu barrier as he traced the picture of a cheesy gordita crunch. "Mommy, look! It's like a taco and a quesadilla had a baby," he exclaimed, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that only a 6-year-old could muster for fast food. The woman forced a smile, the muscles in her cheeks feeling tight and unfamiliar. "It sure is, sweetie," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She hoped he couldn't hear the slight tremor in it. To anyone else, they were just another pair in the dinner rush, a tired mom and her excited kid grabbing a quick bite. But the woman felt like she was standing on a stage under a spotlight, with every one of her failures on display for the handful of other customers to see. Her handbag, a simple canvas tote with a fraying strap, felt impossibly heavy on her shoulder. It wasn't filled with much, just a wallet, a pack of half-crushed crayons, and a stray toy car, but the weight of her situation made it feel like it was filled with stones. She needed this to work. This wasn't just a dinner. It was an apology. It was a reward. It was a desperate attempt to erase the memory of last night, when he had cried himself to sleep because she couldn't afford the new video game all his friends were talking about. It was a promise she had made this morning, her voice bright and full of false cheer. "If you're a good boy at school today, we'll go get a special treat tonight." He had been good. He had come home with a drawing of a star, a gold sticker proudly placed in the center. And now she had to deliver. Her eyes darted back to the menu, the colorful pictures of vibrant enemy. The prices, glowing in red and yellow, seemed to shift and dance, each number a small, sharp jab at her inadequacy. A Chalupa Supreme, a Crunchwrap Supreme, a Baja Blast. The words were a foreign language of excess. She discreetly dipped her hand into her bag, her fingers searching for the familiar texture of her wallet. The movements were small, practiced, designed not to draw attention. She had done this before, in grocery stores and at the gas pump, that little clandestine dance of the financially desperate. Her fingers, numb with a strange mix of cold and anxiety, fumbled with the clasp. Finally it opened. Inside was a sad little collection of currency. A crumpled $5 bill, worn so thin it felt like fabric. 2 ones, looking lonely and defeated. And then the change. A handful of coins she had scavenged from the bottom of the bag, from the cup holder in her car, from the little dish by her front door. She began to count, her thumb moving over the coins in her pocket. Her eyes still fixed on the menu as if she were genuinely contemplating her options. Quarters, 1. 2, 3 dimes, 1, 2, nickels, a lonely. Single nickel, pennies, a small, worthless pile of copper. Her heart sank a little lower with each coin. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough for the feast her son was dreaming of. He was now pointing at the cinnamon twists, his eyes wide. "And can we get those, Mommy? They're like little crunchy donuts?" The lie caught in her throat. "We'll see, honey," she managed to say, the words tasting like ash. She did the math again, and then a third time, just in case a miracle had occurred in the last 10 seconds. It hadn't. The total in her head was a solid, unforgiving number, and it was significantly less than the total her son's heart had already calculated. A weariness had settled deep into her bones, a kind of tired that a full night's sleep couldn't fix anymore. It was the exhaustion of constantly juggling, of always being one unexpected bill away from disaster. She looked at her son's face so full of hope and trust, and a wave of guilt so powerful it almost brought her to her knees washed over her. How could she let him down again? How could she be the one to wipe that beautiful, excited smile off his face? The line behind her was growing. She could feel the presence of others, a silent, impatient pressure on her back. A man cleared his throat. A teenager sighed dramatically. Each sound was a hammer blow to her composure. She felt her face flush with heat, a prickly shame that started at her neck and crept up to her hairline. They knew. They must all know. They could see the poverty clinging to her like a bad smell. They were judging her for taking so long, for holding up the line with her pathetic inability to provide a simple dinner for her child. The young woman took a deep, shaky breath, the air catching in her throat. She had to make a choice. She could turn around now, lead him out with another flimsy excuse about leaving her wallet in the car, and face his tears in the parking lot. Or she could step up to that counter and order the absolute bare minimum, a single bean burrito with no cheese, and endure the disappointment in his eyes as he ate it. Neither option felt like a victory. Hope was a dangerous currency, and she was fresh out of it. She looked at her son one last time, his face still pressed against the glass, lost in a world of cheesy, crunchy possibilities. He was the reason for everything. The reason she worked 2 jobs. The reason she went without. The reason she was standing in this humming, brightly lit purgatory. Her heart hammering against her ribs like a frantic drumbeat counting down to a moment she was dreading. She straightened her shoulders, a small, final act of defiance, and took a step toward the counter. The young woman took a final, deep breath, the air tasting of fried onions and regret. She had made her decision. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the only one she could afford. She straightened her back, trying to muster a semblance of normalcy, a mask of a mother who was simply in charge and not a woman on the verge of breaking. She gave her son's hand a gentle squeeze, a silent apology she wasn't ready to speak aloud, and stepped forward to the counter. The linoleum floor was sticky under her worn-out sneakers, and with each step she felt like she was walking toward her own sentencing. The cashier, a young man with a face full of fresh acne and a name tag that read Alex, didn't look up from the screen he was wiping down with a gray cloth. His movements were slow, deliberate, a portrait of teenage boredom. "Welcome to Taco Bell. What can I get for you?" He mumbled, the words a rehearsed, lifeless script. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck. Her son, oblivious to the silent war raging in his mother's head, took the opportunity to launch into his order. "I want the cheesy gordita crunch. And the cinnamon twists. And a Baja Blast? The big one," he chirped, his voice echoing slightly in the small space. Each item was another twist of the knife. Alex finally looked up, his eyes flickering from the excited little boy to the woman's strained face. He tapped a few buttons on the screen with practiced indifference. "Anything else for you?" he asked, his gaze already drifting back toward his cleaning cloth. The woman's throat felt tight, as if she were trying to swallow a golf ball. She could feel the line behind her, a silent, breathing entity of impatience. She imagined their thoughts. "Just order already. Why is she taking so long?" "Control your kid?" The shame was a physical force, pushing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. She had to say something. She had to end this. "Actually," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, a little louder this time. "Actually, I've changed my mind." Alex paused, his hand hovering over the screen. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, so quick she might have imagined it. "Changed your mind about what?" "About everything," she said, the words tasting like defeat. "I'm sorry. We have to go." A small, confused frown creased her son's forehead. His hand slipped out of hers. "Go?" "But we haven't gotten our food yet," he said, his voice starting to waver with the first hints of a coming storm of disappointment. "I know, sweetie." "I'm so sorry," she said, crouching down so she was at his eye level. This was the hardest part. Looking into his trusting face and lying to him. I think I left my wallet in the car. Silly me. We have to go back and get it." It was a flimsy, pathetic excuse, and she knew it. But it was the best she could come up with on the spur of the moment. Her son's eyes searched hers, looking for the truth. He was so smart, too smart sometimes. He knew her tells. He could see the lie dancing behind her eyes. "But your purse is right here," he said, pointing a small finger at the canvas tote slung over her shoulder. Her heart plummeted. Of course, he was right. How could she have been so stupid? "Oh, this old thing," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded like a strangled cough. "My real wallet, the one with the money in it, must have fallen out. It's a mystery. A real-life mystery. Let's go be detectives and find it, okay?" She was trying to make it a game, a fun adventure, but her voice was shaking too much. The magic wasn't working. His lower lip began to tremble. "But I'm hungry," he whispered, the words so full of pain they almost broke her right there. "I know, baby. I know. And we'll come right back. I promise. As soon as we find the missing wallet." She stood up and took his hand again, her grip a little too firm. She didn't dare look at the cashier. She could feel his eyes on her, a look of pity or perhaps just annoyance that she had wasted his time. She could feel the eyes of the entire line on her back, a silent judgment that burned hotter than any fire. She turned away from the counter, away from the promise of a hot meal she couldn't provide, and began the long walk toward the glass doors. Each step was an effort. The brightly colored restaurant, which had seemed so cheerful just moments ago, now felt like a courtroom where she had just been found guilty of the crime of being poor. The hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like laughter. The smell of the food was a cruel taunt. Her son was dragging his feet behind her, a small, silent weight of sorrow. He didn't say anything else. He didn't cry. He just walked, his disappointment a heavy, palpable thing that filled the space between them. It was so much worse than a tantrum. His quiet resignation was a mirror of her own. They were almost at the door. She could see the darkening sky outside, the cars rushing past in the parking lot. Freedom was just a few feet away. She could get him to the car, maybe find a stray granola bar under the seat, something to tide him over until she could figure out what to do next. She pushed the heavy metal bar on the door, the cool evening air a welcome relief on her flushed face. They were almost out. They were almost safe from the prying eyes and the suffocating shame. Just as they were about to step over the threshold, a quiet, calm voice spoke from behind them. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant and the turmoil in her mind with impossible clarity. "Excuse me," the voice said. "Please don't go." The young woman froze, her hand still on the door. Her son stopped beside her, looking back with a curious expression. She hesitated for a long moment, every instinct screaming at her to keep walking, to escape. But something in that voice, a gentle, almost pleading quality, made her turn around. The young woman froze, her hand still resting on the cool metal of the door handle. The voice was not loud or demanding, but it carried a strange weight, a gentle authority that cut through the fog of her shame and pulled her back from the edge of escape. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to step out into the cool evening air and disappear into the anonymity of the parking lot. But her feet felt rooted to the sticky floor. Her son, whose hand she still held, looked up at her, his own confusion mirrored in his wide, questioning eyes. Slowly, as if moving through thick, invisible water, she turned. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the inside of her ribs, each thump a painful reminder of her exposed vulnerability. She expected to see a manager, or perhaps some annoyed customer who was going to lecture her about holding up the line. But it was neither. Standing a few feet away was a man. He was just a man at first glance, dressed in a simple dark jacket and a worn baseball cap pulled low, obscuring much of his face. He wasn't looking at her with pity or annoyance. His expression was gentle. There was a softness in his eyes that seemed to hold a world of understanding. He had been in the line, she remembered, the quiet one who hadn't fidgeted or sighed. He had just been standing there, a shadow in the periphery of her personal crisis. As her gaze met his, a jolt of recognition shot through her, so unexpected and powerful it made her gasp. It wasn't just a man. It was him. The man from the movies. The one who played the action hero, the thoughtful computer guy, the samurai. She had seen his face on posters and screens for more than half her life, but seeing him in person, in the harsh, buzzing light of a Taco Bell, was surreal. He looked older, more tired, but also more real. The famous face was softened by a day's worth of stubble and the faint lines that appeared around his eyes when he looked at her with that unnerving kindness. A fresh wave of humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. Of all the people in the world to witness her lowest moment, it had to be him. A movie star. A person who lived in a world of private jets and million-dollar paychecks. A universe so far removed from her own reality of counting coins and making up excuses. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She felt her son's small hand tighten in hers, a silent anchor in a sea of overwhelming embarrassment. The man took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, as if he were approaching a frightened animal. He didn't want to startle her. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Please," he said again, his voice still quiet, still impossibly calm. "Don't go on my account." The young woman just stared, her mouth slightly agape, unable to form a single coherent word. Her mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the sheer absurdity of the situation. What was he doing? Was this a prank? Was there a hidden camera somewhere? She scanned the room frantically, but saw nothing but the bored cashier and the other patrons who had already lost interest and gone back to their phones. The man seemed to sense her panic. He offered a small, hesitant smile, a slight upturn of his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained filled with that deep, unsettling empathy. "It looked like you were having a day," he said, his words simple and direct. "We all have them." And just like that, the wall of shame she had so carefully built around herself began to crumble. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't judging her. He was relating to her. In that moment, he wasn't a famous actor. He was just a person who had seen another person struggling and had decided to say something. He gestured vaguely toward the counter she had just fled. "Let me get this," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, but it was phrased as an offer, a gentle suggestion that allowed her to maintain a sliver of dignity. "Whatever he wants. Get him one of everything if you'd like. And something for yourself, too. You deserve a break." The young woman shook her head, a reflexive gesture of polite refusal. "No, you don't have to do that," she finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse with unshed tears. "I couldn't possibly—" But he was already shaking his head, a slow, soft movement. "I want to," he said simply. And then he did something that truly broke her. He lowered himself, crouching down on one worn-out sneaker until he was eye level with her son. The little boy, who had been watching the exchange with a child's open curiosity, no longer looked scared or confused. He looked intrigued. The man in the baseball cap smiled at him, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his entire face. "So," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "what's the good stuff here? I need a pro's opinion. I haven't been here in a long time." The boy's eyes lit up. Old thoughts of his mother's distress, of the missing wallet and the hasty retreat, vanished from his mind. He was now the center of attention, being consulted by an adult who treated his opinion with genuine seriousness. "The cheesy Gordita Crunch is the best," he declared, his voice full of newfound confidence. "And you have to get the cinnamon twists. They're like crunchy, sweet air." The man nodded solemnly, as if he were taking notes. "Cheesy Gordita Crunch. Cinnamon twists. Got it. Anything else? What about a drink? What's the secret weapon?" "The Baja Blast," the boy said without hesitation. "It's a secret color." "A secret color," the man repeated, his eyes twinkling. "Excellent. That's exactly what I needed to know." Watching this interaction, the young woman felt a dam break inside her. The tears she had been fighting back for so long finally spilled over, tracing hot, silent paths down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or shame anymore. They were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. This stranger, this movie star, wasn't just offering to buy her dinner. He was seeing her. He was seeing her son. He was stepping into their messy, complicated little world, and with a few simple words and a kind gesture, he was making everything okay. He was turning a moment of profound failure into a moment of pure magic for her child. He stood back up, turning to her. He saw the tears, and his expression softened even more, if that were even possible. He didn't say anything, just gave a small, understanding nod. It was a look that said, "It's okay. You don't have to be strong right now." And in that moment, she wasn't. She let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half a sob, half a sigh of release. She looked from the kind eyes of the man to the beaming, happy face of her son, and she knew she couldn't refuse. It would be an insult to this incredible, unexpected gift of grace. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." The man just smiled that gentle smile again and gestured toward the counter. "After you," he said. And for the first time that evening, the young woman felt a flicker of hope. She took her son's hand, her grip now firm and confident, and together, they turned and walked back toward the menu. No longer a wall of impossible prices, but a promise of a feast, made possible by a quiet stranger with a heart of gold. The walk back to the counter felt like traversing a great distance, though it was only a few steps. The young woman's hand, which had been clammy with anxiety just moments before, now felt warm and steady, clasped around her son's small fingers. The world seemed to have shifted on its axis. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights no longer felt like interrogating spotlights. They were just lights. The greasy, sweet scent of the restaurant was no longer a cruel taunt, but a promise of comfort. The silent judgment she had felt from the other customers had evaporated, replaced by a bubble of surreal wonder that surrounded her. Her son and the quiet man walking beside them. Her son, for his part, was no longer dragging his feet in disappointment. He was practically skipping, his head held high, bursting with the importance of being the designated expert. He was no longer a child whose mother couldn't afford a treat. He was a consultant, a guide in the exotic land of Taco Bell when they reached the counter. The teenage cashier, Alex, looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing his acne-sprinkled face. He had just watched this same woman flee in defeat, and now she was back, accompanied by a man who looked vaguely familiar, though he couldn't quite place him. The young woman felt a brief pang of the old shame return, but it was quickly extinguished by the calm presence beside her. She didn't have to be the one to speak. The man stepped forward slightly, not in a dominating way, but just enough to take the lead, his posture relaxed and friendly. He gave Alex a small nod. "We're ready to order now," he said, his voice carrying that same gentle, reassuring tone. Then he looked down at the boy, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "All right, Chief," the man said, his eyes twinkling. "Lay it on me. What's the first thing we need?" The boy didn't hesitate. "The cheesy gordita crunch. 2 of them," he declared, feeling bold. The man raised an eyebrow in mock seriousness. "2? A man with an appetite." "I like it. Good call." He turned to the cashier. 2 cheesy gordita crunches." Alex dutifully tapped the screen, his boredom momentarily replaced by curiosity. "And what else?" The man prompted the boy. "The cinnamon twists. For dessert." "Of course." "You can't have a meal without dessert," the man agreed, as if this were a universal law. "What about something to drink? You mentioned a secret weapon." The boy's face lit up, thrilled that he remembered. "The Baja Blast." "The big one." "The big Baja Blast? Done," the man confirmed, and Alex added it to the growing order. But then the man did something that sent a fresh wave of warmth through the young woman's chest. He looked from the boy to her, his gaze soft and considerate. "And what about your mom?" he asked the boy, but his eyes were on her. "What does she like?" "We should get her something really good." The question caught her completely off guard. In all her years of struggle, in all the time she had put her son's needs and wants so far ahead of her own that they had disappeared from view, very few people had ever thought to ask what she might want. She opened her mouth to say, "Oh, nothing for me, I'm fine," the automatic response she had trained herself to give. But before she could speak, her son, with the pure, unfiltered honesty of a child, answered for her. "She likes the cheesy potato griller," he said. "But with no bacon." "Because she doesn't eat bacon." The man's smile widened. "The cheesy potato griller, no bacon." "Perfect," he said to the cashier. "And let's add one of those too." He turned back to the boy. "Anything else?" "Anything at all?" "Don't be shy. This is a celebration." The woman felt a lump form in her throat. This was too much. It was already too much. She gently touched the man's arm. "Please," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is more than enough, really." He just looked at her, his eyes full of a depth of understanding that seemed to span lifetimes. "It's not enough," he said softly, just for her to hear. "You deserve to have a night where you don't have to say no. Let me do this." He turned back to the boy. "One last chance. Anything else your heart desires?" The boy thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "A quesarito?" he suggested, a little less sure this time. "A quesarito. Now you're talking," the man exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. "Excellent choice. Let's add one of those." The order was complete. The tray, when it was ready, was laden with more food than they had eaten in a single sitting in years. 2 cheesy gordita crunches, a quesarito, a cheesy potato griller, a large Baja Blast, and an order of cinnamon twists. It was a feast. It was a mountain of abundance. As Alex announced the total, a number that would have once sent her into a cold sweat, the man simply pulled a simple black credit card from his wallet and tapped it on the machine. The beep was a small sound, but to the young woman it echoed like a cathedral bell. There was no grand gesture, no fanfare. It was the most casual, ordinary act in the world, and yet it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever witnessed. The contrast between her frantic, shameful counting of crumpled bills and coins and his quiet, effortless payment was a chasm so wide it felt like it separated 2 different universes. While the boy was mesmerized by the colorful mountain of food on their tray, the woman was watching the man. She was trying to process the storm of emotions raging inside her. There was gratitude so profound and immense it felt like it might drown her. There was disbelief that a person so famous, so far removed from her world, would take the time to see her, to help her. But more than anything, there was a sense of being restored. It was like a tight knot in her chest. One she had lived with for so long she'd forgotten it was there had finally, gently, come undone. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that was the soundtrack to her life had gone silent. He wasn't just buying her dinner. He was giving her back a piece of herself she thought she had lost forever, the piece that believed she deserved good things, the piece that didn't have to be ashamed. He had looked at her in her moment of failure and had not seen a failure. He had seen a person having a tough day. As the cashier handed them the overflowing tray, the man gave them one last, kind smile. He reached out and gently ruffled the boy's hair. "Enjoy your feast, my man," he said. Then he looked at the woman, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "You take care of yourself," he said, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't a platitude. It was a sincere instruction, a piece of advice from one soul to another. And then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't look for recognition. He just pulled his baseball cap down a little lower and headed for the door, disappearing into the night as if he were just a phantom, a dream conjured up by a desperate heart. The young woman stood there, frozen, holding the heavy tray. Her son was already reaching for a cheesy gordita crunch, his face a picture of pure, unadulterated bliss. But she was looking at the empty space where the man had been, a single tear tracing a path through the dried ones on her cheek. The tray in her hands was heavy, but the weight in her heart was gone. In its place was a warmth, a light, a memory that she knew would sustain her long after the food was gone. The young woman stood there for a long moment, the heavy tray in her hands feeling both impossibly real and like a dream. The space where the man had stood was now just empty air, but his presence lingered, a warm, invisible blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade back in, the sizzle of the griddle, the distant hum of the soda machine, the muffled chatter of other customers. The world was moving on, but for her, everything had stopped and then restarted in a different key. Her son, oblivious to the profound shift in the universe, was already reaching across the tray, his small fingers closing around the warm, soft shell of a cheesy gordita crunch. "Can I eat it now, Mommy? Can I?" he asked, his voice muffled by his anticipation. The question pulled her back to the present. "Yes, sweetie," she said, her voice soft, a little breathless. "Of course." She scanned the restaurant, her eyes finding an empty booth in the corner, a little alcove of privacy. She carried the tray, a bounty of cheesy, crunchy goodness, and slid into the worn plastic seat. Her son scrambled in opposite her, his eyes wide as he surveyed the feast laid out before him. It looked like a mountain of food. The cheesy gordita crunches, the quesarito oozing cheese and sauce, the large cup of Baja Blast sweating with condensation, and the little paper bag of cinnamon twists waiting like a treasure at the end of a rainbow. And there, just for her, was the cheesy potato griller, no bacon. She watched as her son took his first bite. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over his face. A little bit of sour cream smudged his nose, and he didn't even care. He chewed with a blissful abandon she hadn't seen in him for a long time. In that moment, he wasn't a kid who was disappointed about a video game or worried about his mom's stress. He was just a kid eating his favorite food, happy and safe. Seeing his happiness was a nourishment in itself, a warmth that spread through her chest and pushed out the last of the cold, gnawing anxiety. She unwrapped her own potato griller. The smell of melted cheese, seasoned potatoes, and creamy jalapeno sauce filled her senses. It was a simple, fast food item, but to her it smelled like grace. She took a bite. The flavors exploded in her mouth. The salty potatoes, the gooey cheese, the tangy sauce. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. Because she wasn't just tasting food. She was tasting kindness. She was tasting relief. She was tasting the sweet, sweet flavor of not having to say no. As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by her son's happy munching sounds. She found herself just watching him, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he licked the cheese off his fingers with complete focus. This was what she had wanted. This was the reason she had walked into this restaurant with a heart full of dread and a purse full of loose change. She had wanted to give him this one perfect moment, and a stranger, a quiet man in a baseball cap, had made it happen. But it was more than that. As she took another bite of her griller, she realized the man hadn't just done it for her son. He had done it for her, too. He had seen her struggle, her shame, her quiet desperation, and instead of looking away, he had stepped in. He hadn't made a big deal out of it. He hadn't drawn attention to her poverty. He had just treated her with a gentle, profound dignity that had stripped away her shame. He saw a person having a tough day, not a failure. The thought brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude so deep and wide it felt like it could fill an ocean. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, not wanting her son to see. She didn't want him to think anything was wrong. Because for the first time in a very long time, everything felt right. Her son, now halfway through his second gordita crunch, looked up at her, his face a messy masterpiece of sauce and happiness. "This is the best day ever," he declared, his voice full of simple, absolute truth. And she nodded because it was. It was the best day ever. Not because of the food, but because of the humanity behind it. It was a reminder that the world wasn't just a cold, uncaring place full of bills she couldn't pay and obstacles she couldn't overcome. It was also a place where a kind stranger could see your pain and, with a quiet word and a simple gesture, make it all go away. It was a world where magic was real, and sometimes it looked like a man paying for your Taco Bell. They ate until they were both stuffed, a pleasant, warm fullness that settled deep in their bellies. The quesarito was devoured, the Baja Blast was drained, and the cinnamon twists were shared, their light, airy sweetness a perfect end to the feast. The tray was a mess of crumpled wrappers and empty cups, a battlefield of a wonderful war. As she gathered the trash to throw it away, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was missing. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the background music of her life for as long as she could remember was gone. In its place was a quiet melody of hope. Walking out of the restaurant was a completely different experience from walking in. There was no shame, no head down, no rush to escape. She held her son's hand, his small fingers sticky with cinnamon sugar, and walked with a slow, steady pace. The evening air was cool and crisp, and the parking lot lights seemed to glow a little softer. The world looked brighter, more hopeful. The drive home was quiet. Her son, full and content, was dozing in the passenger seat, his head lolling against the window. The young woman drove with a new sense of calm. The streetlights of the city blurred past, but she was seeing more than just lights. She was seeing the faces of all the people she passed, wondering about their stories, wondering about their secret struggles. She felt a new sense of connection, a new empathy, a gift the man had given her without even knowing it. He had not only eased her burden, he had made her want to ease the burdens of others. When they got home, she carried her sleeping son into his room and tucked him into bed, kissing his forehead, which still smelled faintly of sour cream. She stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching him sleep, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The problems in her life hadn't vanished. The rent was still due, the bills were still piled on the kitchen counter, and tomorrow she would have to wake up and face it all again. But she was different now. She was stronger. She had a new memory tucked away in her heart, a secret weapon to pull out on the dark days. A memory of a quiet voice, a kind smile, and a tray full of food that tasted like hope. It was a story she would tell herself over and over again. A reminder that even in the middle of a struggling day in a Taco Bell, you are not alone. You are seen. And sometimes a little bit of kindness can change everything.